Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff, like in retrospect, makes a lot of sense to me, but it wasn't all within the advice that I was receiving from mentors. So I kind of had to like realize it along the way.
So, recently, a friend of mine and I had a discussion about my experience on the job market for the past 9 or so months. And we realized that perhaps some other people might be interested in our conversation. So, just for context, I submitted about 280 applications to academic and non academic jobs. And the academic jobs were in both the sciences and in the humanities, so kind of a broad spectrum. And we talked about a lot of things from like the timing of when jobs are posted and how things like mentors and advisors could impact your job market experience, how your dissertation could impact your job market experience, the timing of graduation and publications. Um, we also discussed what else? We discussed how your online presence, if you have one or don't have one, how that could impact your online presence, how widely one should be applying or one could apply on the job market, and then what the application process is like from submission to job offer, assuming things go well. And at the end, we kind of discuss how economic changes could impact the job market experience, since currently we are experiencing the COVID 19 pandemic, which is definitely having an impact on various parts of the economy. So, anyway, I hope you enjoy it. If you like, if you want to subscribe to this or the other stuff I do, like tutorials about research or just videos about the kinds of research that I and my colleagues do, then subscribe. Anyway, peace.
Well, you have some really good mentorship. I mean, it's really lucky, and that gives you a competitive advantage because some of your competitors might have, maybe they have very good philosophers who are advising them, but they might be totally disconnected or out of touch.
Yeah, I think like a lot, it's interesting. It seems like some of the prevailing wisdom that I received when I was early in grad school or applying to grad school was like find an advisor who's a big deal, basically, so that your best letter writer will be from a big deal philosopher. But usually the big deal philosophers haven't been on the job market in decades. And so they kind of have no idea how to advise their advisees about how to navigate the current job market. And so I'm a little worried that that advice actually might not be great these days. Because if you have an advisor who's decades off the market, it's not clear to me how they're going to be able to help you other than this like prestige or like, famous factor.
Right. Well, I mean, it sounds like they would be very useful as letter writers or as, um, reviewers on your writing. But in
Right.
terms of practical advice, but then the question is, well, what's the role of the advisee or the advisor in this process? Because who your dissertation, who the chair of your committee is a part of how you're putting yourself out there, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, whose student is this? Is Nick Byrd John Schwenkler's student? And I'm sure that probably has an influence. Although I'm not sure for I'm not for certain. I haven't sat in on these committees, but does that have any influence?
I don't know. So when I was sitting in on the committees, that never came up.
Oh
Who
wow. So
who
maybe
advisors
I'm just
were.
in my head.
I mean, I'm sure it has some effect, right? So here's the way I could definitely see it having an effect. I know so and so, so maybe I'm at University X, and I know John, and I have a I think well of John. In fact, this did happen on the job market with another job that I anyway, different job. Um, I emailed somebody about a job, and they replied, "Oh, you're John Schwenkler's student," and I think they said, "quote John Schwenkler is a force of nature," and I
That's
actually have.
exactly what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have heard about your stuff through John, and that's the kind of thing where I think having, yeah, a well-known advisor helps. But unless your advisor also is like aware of what helps you on the job market, they can only do so much for you. So John is like good at being well known, but also good at like knowing what the current job market is like, and so I think he's just like particularly well suited to advise people.
Mhm. Right. So you mentioned waves of job openings. Is this what appears on like Phil Jobs or something?
Yeah, so I was applying to jobs in both psychology and in philosophy, and then I guess also I was applying to jobs like in the private sector, in the public sector, in the think tanks and nonprofit, like everything.
Oh,
So
really? That's
yeah,
interesting. That's not. I didn't know about
but
that.
yeah, but in academia, it seems like the psychology job market opens up a little earlier than the philosophy job market. So I was seeing openings as early as July, I guess, mid to late July. Um, and then in philosophy, it seemed like those positions would start posting around September, maybe a little earlier, but their deadlines were often late September, October, were the earliest deadlines I remember anyway. And then that continues through the fall. And then there's like a little bit of a break between the fall and the spring. And it seems like in spring, a bunch of new positions open up. And, if I had to guess, it seems like these positions are basically being advertised to the people who didn't get jobs in the fall.
Right.
Because they're like a little less prestigious, perhaps. Maybe they're a lot more postdocs than tenure track type things, or like visiting assistant professorships rather than assistant professorships.
Right.
And the other types of job markets are kind of year round. And the other thing I've noticed is that military and government positions are usually like in rolling 3-month windows. So they like every 3 months is a window that you can submit an application. And so they collect them, and at the end of every submission window, they start reviewing, and then they reply to those people while they collect another round of applications. But that's just kind of year round.
I wonder about the nature of that competition. I mean, you mentioned like certain jobs, you spend like 20 minutes of research and send an application. So you hear like, there's 400 applications for this one position. You wonder like, yeah, but like how out of that number, how many of them are even remotely a match
Right.
for that position?
Yeah.
And it seems like the position you got was like, it's like perfect match. So it's all about finding the match, right?
I think that's right. This is a very unfortunate analogy that somebody used recently when talking about this, but I'll just relay it. They said they were asking me, is it better to have, what did they say? Is it better to have an AK, as in like a machine gun or something, or a sniper rifle on the job market? Like, namely, like, do you just pick like the 20 jobs that are perfect fit for you, or do you just like apply to everything? And I told him like, well, I chose the apply to everything route, basically.
The fire
And
hose, you just shoot
yeah,
everything.
but if I was on a selection committee, I'd be like, no, don't give me your application if it's a waste of my time.
Right.
And you might think that if I was to consider my opportunity cost for what I could have done with the time that I was spending on applications that basically had no real possibility of turning into a job, what could I have done with that time instead? Maybe it turns out that like I could have done something more career advancing with my time. So I don't know. Maybe a balance, but.
Well, but then the other issue is, with low, if you decrease the number, the probability might diminish, right? So,
Yeah.
If you don't get any of those 20 that you've spent all of your time crafting towards, at the end of the day, the worry is you might be left with nothing. Now, last question, were you working 100 hours a week or something?
I think from January to now, I averaged over 50, but probably in the low 50s. And a big chunk of that was job market stuff. So if I was teaching a course or two right now, I don't know how I would have fit it all in.
So you chose, you delivered, and you were on a scholarship or something?
Yeah, I'm on a fellowship right now.
So
yeah.
you're not even TA. So
right.
you just focused entirely on that. That makes sense. I mean, you put a lot of applications out there. I can't imagine you spent, more than a day researching any one job, right?
No, so the range of work per application goes from something like 20 minutes to weeks. So the 20-minute applications are like, there's some school that you've never really heard of that you're technically, they have a position that you're technically eligible for, and you don't really know anyone in their department, and no one in their department really does anything that's like super related to your work. So like you couldn't like really tailor a cover letter to their department because you don't have a lot to say about their department.
Right.
So you basically just send them a kind of like boilerplate cover letter and your CV and your other stuff, and you fill out whatever like they're going to ask you questions about like are you a citizen, are you going to require sponsorship, and the standard job application questions. You do all that, it takes 20 minutes, you're done. And then the upper end of the spectrum is, and this is very common in the postdoc world, is they need you to submit a 5 to 8 page proposal for research that spans 2 to 3 years. And so you have to propose like specific projects. And for me, that's often like, I'm going to do these 3 experiments. I'm going to use these methods. This is how many people I'm going to be studying. This is what analyses I'll run. This is what we would find and why it would be relevant to what you care about. This is how much it'll cost. and this is what we can do with the information long term. We can like apply for more funding, or we can solve this problem, or we can address an unanswered question in the field, or all three.
Mm-hmm.
And those things often you have to like collaborate with the people at whatever institution it is. Like, so, you know, the person at the government institution or the person at the university who would be your supervisor. And you're basically, you know, you give them a draft of the proposal, they give you feedback, and this goes on for weeks and weeks. And then when the deadline comes, you submit it all.
Interesting. So, and you're privately reaching out to these people, I would imagine?
How does that work? So in one case, or in a few cases, I would reach out to someone and be like, hey, there's a postdoc opportunity at such and such. It requires me to work with someone like you. You're my first choice. Here's some information about me in case you don't know about me. What do you think? And, you know, some people are like, yeah, no, sorry. And then other people are like, oh, this is interesting. And that would actually help with what I'm thinking about doing over the next few years. Absolutely. Give me a draft of the proposal. And then the other thing that has happened to me a few times is like, somebody will reach out to me like, hey, I heard you're working on this. We have a postdoc opportunity at this institution that, you know, could potentially be a good fit. Why don't we work together on a proposal? And I've even gotten someone, you know, who sends me a letter rejecting my application for one postdoc, saying, hey, yeah, we can't offer you this postdoc, but there's this other postdoc that we think maybe you could work on with us. Give us a proposal for that postdoc, you know. So
Nice.
There seems to be a few different avenues.
I mean, some of this might be general information for any kind of thing, because what you were describing for postdoc applications sound very similar to like a grant proposal. But I'm, you know, so for instance, the way a project would be conducted, you know, having experiments, you know, doing these kinds of things, it makes a lot of sense for the kind of work you're doing. And I'm wondering, how would that translate in like a philosophy domain with like philosophy postdocs and stuff?
Yeah, so in the philosophy, yeah, so I've been applying to grants and postdocs for a while, and it does seem that, like, for instance, if you apply to NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, I think is what that stands for, these grant applications are basically centered around like, what book are you going to write, or what, you know, archive do you need to go visit, you know, what, and usually the output is like a manuscript essentially.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that application looks different. You're not proposing experiments and scientific methods and data analyses. You're proposing like, you know, some content that you need access to that might cost more money than usual, like an archive, or, you know, you have to visit some other country because that's where the thing is that you're studying. And then, so you need to pay to travel there, you need to pay to stay there. Maybe you need office space at that institution or near that institution while you're working there. And so these would be parts of the application process. And then, you know, the standard, instead of experimental methods, you're going to say like kind of what your angle is on whatever it is you're trying to study, and, you know, what big questions you're trying to address, and like how the stuff you're aiming to study is going to help you address those things. And then you probably do need to say something about like what a realistic output of the project could be. Like, not just, I'm going to write a book, but like, I'm going to write a book and I expect it to have chapters roughly like this.
Almost like a prospectus on a book, kind of.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that makes sense. It's interesting. Maybe it very much depends upon, you know, the job and what the expectations of the hosting institution are. And you mentioned like having a supervisor, or,
Right.
you know, many postdocs might have supervisory roles, and then reaching out to them prior, you know, to the deadline with some sort of idea, you know, some explanation for what your ideas are and how it hooks into the work. That makes a lot of sense, you know. Is this, I hear the stereotype about if you graduate with a PhD, are you getting cold? You know, so there's this notion of hot versus cold.
Yeah, that's kind of my sense.
It is? Wow. Because
Well,
it's like one of those stereotypes that you wonder.
okay, so I'm going to
It's
take that back a
toxic or
bit.
something, right?
So I take that back a little bit, because there's a trade-off between you get your PhD and then some time goes by before you get a job and you can look cold, so to speak. But there's this other thing where you're in a PhD program and you just have to convince people like, I'm ready to defend, like I'm going to finish. I'm not going to be one of those students who you hire and takes 2 years to finish their PhD while they're working for you. So the sweet spot is obviously like, you have to basically be like, I'm so close to done. Like I'm just like in a holding pattern. You have to convince them of that, but not be done so that you don't start to look cold. And that's kind of a hard balance to strike, right? So the ideal is like you have a full draft of your dissertation sent to your committee, and they've looked it over and basically said like, yeah, minus, you know, refining a few things here and there, this is good. If you can get to that point and all of your letter writers can say that in their letters, um, and you can maintain that for a few years because you're in a department like FSU, that's the ideal.
Right. I don't know how long your dissertation is, but for most people, they might get maybe 3 articles out of a dissertation.
Oh yeah, at
You
least.
know, well, maybe more, but and so
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're getting 3, maybe 5 articles out of that at most. And one of the chapters like lit review, and you're not really going to use that.
Just on that point, lit review chapters turn into great Phil Compass articles.
Oh,
So
really?
Phil Compass articles are often like helpful reviews of a literature.
Oh, yeah. No, I've read many. But
So I highly recommend
smart.
people to take their lit review chapter and submit it to Phil Compass.
Well, how long are all of your articles? I mean, I know you have a lot of co-authored partnerships on individual, but are they all parts of your dissertation, or what's like the relationship between the articles you're trying to publish and the work you've done in your dissertation?
The dissertation is just a means to an end. So for me, each chapter is a separate project that's still related to reflective reasoning somehow. All of my chapters are solo authored work because I didn't know how co-authored work could be put in a dissertation, if at all, and I
Yeah,
didn't
it's
honestly.
your dissertation. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think some people do it, but I just didn't want to like figure out the bureaucracy of that. And it can just get confusing down the road if you see a chapter that's like strikingly similar to a published paper that has multiple people on it. Anyway, uh, so yeah, all my chapters are solo authored work, and they're really standalone projects. I see every chapter is like totally modular. You could take it out of the dissertation and put it in a journal, and it makes sense. That's the goal.
Oh, good. And your committee they didn't want a kind of unifying through line that make your dissertation like a book.
Well, okay, so I do think that that's still a thing in philosophy, and that might still be the main way of doing it because one of the ways you get tenure in philosophy is a book. And so if you have a dissertation that can turn into a book, then that's going to help a job committee see how you're going to get tenure. So I don't think that's a bad idea. It's just I do empirical stuff where the
Yeah, that's
currency
a plot.
is, yeah,
It's a different
yeah,
subfield almost.
yeah. The currency in the areas that I work in is papers and chapters. And so I treated my dissertation as a pile of papers and chapters.
That makes sense. And that's also why it's good that we're having this conversation like between you and me, because
Yeah,
sometimes, I mean, some of this advice is really good, but it may be specific
right.
to the subfield you're working in. And aren't books fun though? I mean, like I know, I don't know. I'm just
I think they're overrated, but I'm
really, yeah.
it's
We
probably my
mentioned
bias.
we had an interesting disagreement about that. I don't know. I mean, should a graduate student wait to have 3 or 4 publications before even starting, or like if you just have 1 or 2, is that good enough to kind of
Yeah.
put your stuff out there? And then you're mentioning having stuff in the pipeline.
Yeah, so I think having one or two is fine, at least to get considered for jobs. So when I first started on the job market, I only had one or two, and there was a couple tenure track positions that were considering me because they told me like, "Hey, can you send us another document because we're considering you on our short list or whatever."
Oh wow.
Um, I didn't get selected for those positions; those were earlier in the job market, but it was at least enough to be, on their radar. But I think what helped for a lot of people was not just showing the one or two papers that I think that I had at the time, but that I also had other categories of stuff. And so that's the papers that I currently have under review. And I try to follow that rule that you and I have both heard, which is like try to have at least 3 papers under review at any time. So there's usually 3 papers that I have like at journals being considered. And then I have another category, which is papers I'm currently preparing to be under review. So like I'm doing the final revisions so that I can send it out. So that's another category on my CV. And then the final category on my CV is just like the pile of papers that are fully written. There's a full draft. I've even presented it at a conference or something, but I haven't touched it in a while. And that'll be, the next set of papers that I'll touch to then submit to journals. So there's kind of 4 categories. They're like what's out, what's under review, what's about to be out, and what will be out after that.
And that creates some evidence that you have 4 or 5 years
Right.
of work that you can be doing, and not just taking a gamble or a risk on
Right.
a candidate or something like that.
Yeah. And a lot of the interviews that I experienced, many of the questions seem to be trying to get at this meta question, which goes something like this, like, how likely are you to be able to get tenure? Are we going to hire you and then have an issue where like we're in a tough position because we're not sure we can grant you tenure? We need to know with confidence that you have a path to tenure, essentially. And so that's kind of what I think what the papers were doing in that regard.
Well, that's sensible. I mean, that's pretty much what I would have predicted.
Yeah.
People, because it's a high stakes decision hiring someone for who knows the indefinite future, and given that kind of investment, they're risk averse people to begin with, and they probably want to assure themselves that the investment will pay off and not get stuck with the lemon.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because I was curious about the timeline, because I remember like the last time we spoke, it was during your practice interview prior to your flight out.
So what they did is they told me, hey, you're going to come out on this day. It'll be from roughly this time to this time, and those times are basically like first thing in the morning, breakfast, to dinner at night. So roughly 12 hours. And I don't think I had more than 5 to 10 minutes to myself at any given time in that 12 hours, right? So it'd be like meetings all day long, and then like I could use the restroom or go get a cup of water occasionally. Otherwise, I'm in a meeting or walking to a meeting. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, it was a dinner with 3 of the people that I had talked to earlier in the day. And they gave me the agenda in advance, like who I was going to be meeting with when. So I just filled up my calendar with each meeting, and in each calendar item, I had like 3 questions I wanted to ask each person, basically so that like if things got awkward and quiet, I could lead the conversation, and
so
that
prepped with questions.
Right.
Good, smart.
So then I think late in the day, I mentioned to them, like, I just realized since I first submitted my application over a month ago, there's like more stuff on my CV. Should I resubmit my CV? And then they tell me, oh yeah, we have about a week until we make our decision, a little bit more. So send us that. It's not too late. And so I sent them that. And I think I even like highlighted on the PDF, like all the new stuff so that they could just quickly scan it and see what the differences are.
Right.
And then I sent that to all my other places that I was under consideration at. And then about a week and change go by and I don't hear anything. And I think, okay, so they offered the position to someone else. And then another day or 2 goes by or something. And I get an email saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you over the phone about an offer. Can we talk tomorrow or something?
So how did that first conversation go when they say we're going to talk about an offer?
Small talk, and then he transitions to, we'd like to talk about an offer. We, insert fluff about like, we liked meeting you and positive stuff about you, blah, 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 blah. Here's
all that positive stuff, right?
Well, I'm sure it's like boilerplate stuff. Like they're not going to say like, we actually didn't enjoy meeting with you, but they're not going to say that.
No, of course.
But then, and then they say like the salary is this, the startup fund is this, the we can get you this type of office and we can get you this equipment and we would do this. And, here's some stuff to know about benefits. And they kind of run through that. How does that sound? And then I got to say like, a lot of this is great and really encouraging, but, I was expecting a bit more based on my research in terms of salary. I don't know what's possible. Is that something you could look into? And then they look into it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I couldn't imagine there being an expectation that you would answer on the spot. Like,
oh, no. So I've been told by a few people that for tenure track jobs, the timeline goes like this. They give you an offer. You have a week to negotiate that. So you might be making multiple calls back and forth to the person who gives you the offer. Maybe if you have other offers, you're talking with those people as well. After about that week, they need to write up a formal written offer. And they don't want to take all the time to go through the bureaucracy of like having HR write up this letter and stuff, get people to sign it if they don't think you're going to sign it. So they need to know, like, after this week of negotiation is over, like, we're going to write up a letter with this. Is there a good chance you're going to sign that? And you're not committing to signing it. You're just telling them you're not wasting your time in writing the letter. And they say, okay, we'll write up the letter and send it to you. And then the letter usually has like another week, maybe 2 weeks of time for you to sign it. So it'll say, here's all the offer. Here's the contract. Essentially, we would be agreeing to. Please return this to us if you're going to return this to us signed by, a week from now or 2 weeks from now. The one thing I would say is with postdocs, you might not have as much time or negotiation period. And so like that process just might be a little bit more compressed than with a tenure track job.
Okay. cost, I wanted to ask about negotiation of salary,
Yeah.
because that's something that, you know, people talk about as something you got to do. And
Yeah.
the problem is grad students, you just take yourself for granted. You're just willing to kind of, your default is to accept whatever they give you. And I think that's probably a bad idea, right? So you don't, I mean, we're recording this, so you don't have to reveal too much, but I was just curious, what's the strategy, you know?
So, the ideal situation is to have multiple offers, because then you have a lot more power. But one thing I would say is, as soon as you get an offer, you communicate to anyone else that you think you're under consideration for, like because you've interviewed there, or like they've sent you an email suggesting that they're considering your application. You immediately email those other people to say, I have this offer. You don't have to give them all the details, but you say, I have an offer. Because then if they really want you, they can go talk to their provost or, whoever to like speed things up on their end to give you a counter offer. And then if you have a counter offer, you can go back to the original offer people and be like, hey, I just got a better offer. What can you do? Right. So these are the ideal situations where you have multiple offers and you can use those as negotiation power.
This is for the top 1% of candidates on the
Yeah,
market.
right. And yeah.
It's probably not going to be applicable to me, but still, it's good to hear.
But I will say that in my experience, there have been situations where I get an offer, I say to someone else, I have an offer, and they're like, we can't counter in a timely manner, maybe because the coronavirus has froze up everything at our university. So like, you should probably take the job. And so then I go back to the original offer people and I say, look, we were really hoping for more based on, our research on cost of living and, what people get paid in assistant professorship jobs at institutions like yours. And they can say one of two things. So the kind of mean rational thing for the chair of a department or a dean to say is, well, we think the next person on the list is just as good as you. So if you don't want the offer, that's fine. And if they're nice or, supportive or whatever, they'll say, I'll talk with my provost and get back to you. And that's what happened with me. And they did come back with a higher number. So
wow. So
it's not crazy to ask, even if you don't have a ton of power.
Do you think your online presence made a difference? So you have this blog, you've been blogging stuff, and people have been referencing your stuff, and I think a lot of people are using it. Do you think that your online presence made any difference?
For this job, I think it did. When I went back, like kind of after I got the offer, or at some point later in the process, I looked at the description, and a big part of the description was like online or public scholarship and having an online presence and stuff. So for this job, I think it probably was.
So now you can go back and tell those professors that all that time you spent was not that bad of an idea. Yeah, well, the thing is, the economy was doing so well right before the coronavirus, and especially the southern schools in Florida and Texas were hiring, radically expanding. It's insane just how many hires they were doing. So that was clearing the market, I think, a lot of what was there. And now, we're back, just in time, right?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how this affects the academic job market.
I wouldn't be, well, it's hard to know, right? But from now, I guess I'm expecting the worst, like in some sense, I'm expecting kind of a repetition of 2007.
Yeah. I definitely expect grad applications to increase dramatically because lots of people will be without work. And so they'll think, well, now it's time to go back to grad school.
Well, but that's exactly what people thought in 2007.
Right. But I don't know if that translates. I don't know if that translates to the academic job market, right? Because a lot of people might get a degree, but then not go into academia. They just wanted to get a PhD or a master's in philosophy while it was a reasonable thing to do because they didn't have another opportunity that was better. And then they'll go back to, their office job when they're done.
Well, maybe, but what makes the job market so competitive is the glut of PhDs. It's not the paucity of positions. Some of the data that they use, at least in the book, The Cracks in Every Tower, is pretty. He makes the case, at least I found it. I'm not a specialist in this field, so it's not really the best of, but it seemed persuasive from what I've read, that the number of tenure track positions in the humanities is actually expanding. It's on a gradual linear increase.
That's great.
Yeah, I know it is great, but that's the opposite of what you hear. But I think a lot of what's informing that perception is not the paucity of tenure track humanities jobs. It's rather the glut of candidates.
Okay, sounds good. Peace.
Awesome.